another installment of Real Talk with Herschel. This is a series of interviews we're going to do with authors, black authors throughout Alabama, hopefully. Sitting with me today is Dr. White, Robert O. White, a constitutional law professor in American humanities, sociologist, and author, community leader, and a pastor. If anybody knows anything about Dr. White, he is a friend to our show. And I'm proud to call him my brother.
Absolutely.
He's always been a help, and we consider him a part of our family as well as he us. We're here today to talk about his book, Or Else. He's also writing, and he also wrote a book called Highway Through America's Civil Rights Corridor. Dr. White, thank you for coming out today.
Happy to be here.
All right. We'll jump right into it. Your newest book, Or Else, is fundamentally about organizing.
Right.
You want to give me a little overview of
Yeah. Well, the title of the book is Or Else, and what it's about political organizing, but what we're doing is we're using the African American experience to bring out some critical points on how to organize. So we use historical examples beginning with slavery and how the slaves organized themselves, and then during Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement, we're going to profile some local political organizations, state political organizations, and as we identify the different factors necessary for effective community and effective political organizing, we're going to teach some history lessons at the same time. We're going to talk about slave revolts, we're going to talk about the Haitian Revolution, we're going to talk about a lot of topics that people typically don't bring into the conversation, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn from the past. And so our history is not just something that we look at and and glory over, but it's actually something practical for today. So that's what we want to do. We call it Or Else because community organizing and political organizing is built actually off of threats. It's built off of the pursuit of political power. And so when we are organizing, we have to organize with the understanding that we may have to make good on our threats. So that's why we call it Or Else. And a lot of people don't even know how to bargain, how to bargain from a position of power. So basically what we're saying is that historically, because of our legacy of resistance, we identify those things that we want, and either you give them to them or else. There are consequences. So there are consequences to not paying attention to people's wants and desires and pursuits. And so basically all political organizing has an or else factor to it. So why not African Americans?
Yeah, that's very true. Now, what made you write this book from the perspective of an organization as opposed to an activist or a socialist?
Yeah, good question. Well, basically, what I've had the opportunity to do is I've had the opportunity to be at ground zero of local movements and local pushes for things. And I've seen the successes and I've seen the failures. And a lot of times, you will pay attention to the national movement, but we will lose the local battle. And one major observation is the local civil rights movement that took place in Montgomery and in Selma. We had the Montgomery bus boycott to take place. We had the Selma to Montgomery march to take place without either of those events bringing significant political change in the cities where those events took place, which means that you have these major civil rights advances and victories, if you would, without it ever factoring into any kind of political power changing hands. So in Montgomery, in Selma, you had those events, but the political power structure was able to survive and continue, another decade or two, until eventually, those things happen. So you can have local movements, but when those local movements events are brought to a national attention, they tend to lose their political viability locally, which means you can try to win a national battle and totally lose the local one. So the people's lives never change. You know, the crowd just gets bigger and the momentum just gets bigger, but, you know, all politics are local. So you have to learn how to engage City Hall. So the book is about engaging City Hall with the understanding that if City Hall can be changed, the United Nations can as well. So we start locally and move forward from there.
So again, this is basically about organization.
Yeah.
Now, where did you get the concept from? Or were you taught how to organize it?
Yeah. I got my teeth cut with the labor unions.
Okay.
And so the labor unions was the first political, if you would, organization that I was formally trained in. And so I was listening to what the union organizers were saying and doing, you know. And so I come into the game that way. So I come with sometimes with a different perspective, a little more tenacity than a lot of other people because, you know, labor organizers have shown up built around or else. Exactly. Without any kind of compromise or even apology, you know. So that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from, you know, my experience in other groups, which in my opinion were somewhat reactionary, you know, and really, I'll say, you know, somewhat enabled to advance an interest that people have. So when we say or else, basically what we're saying is we have an interest, it's worth protecting, it's worth pursuing, you know, it's worth advancing, and you know, we're going to do those things that are necessary to bring it to pass, and we're not apologizing for it. That's, you know, anybody that believes in anything is going to be willing to do that. So we're not claiming any kind of exclusivity in anything. We're not doing anything that other people wouldn't do, you know, to get what it is that they want. So we're using W.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, Tasana Overture, Hubert Harrison. You know, those names are mentioned, Frederick Douglass, in the book to show people, give examples of how to get what you want.
Right. Okay. Now, in your book, you openly caution against over-romanticizing figures and ideologies.
Yeah.
And I quote, effective community organizing is not about ideology or ideas, which are measurable. Instead, it is about simply converting group demands into property. Property, right. So, what are the pitfalls of romanticizing these leaders or these ideas?
Right. Yeah. The danger is you get hooked in personality and you lose purpose. And most of the time, a lot of organizations that are started by individuals, those organizations are nothing more than an extension of their personalities, which means that the organization actually is an extension of a certain individual's worldview and not necessarily a consensus of a community. So the whole end game is to try to get people to buy into what an individual is trying to do, and then the skill of that person is to make those individual interests look like group interests. And so that's when you have a breakdown. So the whole advancement of the group is null and void, but you'll see the individuals advancing. That's because the individuals created the group for their own personal advancement. So that's why I said we can't get centered around a prolific personality, right? Because when that prolific personality dies or leaves or goes to jail, the whole thing plummets. But, you know, you have corporations, you know, that lose CEOs all the time. You know, I'll use McDonald's as an example. But just because McDonald's might lose a CEO or a board member, that doesn't mean that the taste of the Big Mac changes. You know, because everybody knows what the job is. Whoever those leaders are, it has nothing to do with the product that goes out there. So it's the same with it should be, you know, the same with community organizing. It's not about the individual people, it's about the collective who are trying to reach a set of objectives that everybody knows are reachable because the results are qualitative and quantitative. the results are. So you'll know when you won. So it's also a way of evaluating effective leadership, right? Because if you just focus on ideology and ideas, like in America, all an intellectual is someone that has ideas. That's all they are. Well, here's the thing. What happens if that idea doesn't work? Do they pay a price? Because they're human casualties for people who follow them, right? So you could be a political ideologue, you could have ideas, and those ideas be dead wrong. They may be popular, but they're just totally flawed, in their premise, it could just be a fantasy. But here's the thing: when people put their time, energy, money, and effort into something that does not work, there's no way to hold an intellectual accountable, because all they did was give you an idea to begin with. That's why in political community organizing, everybody knows what the objective is. And you're not following someone's own ideas or ideology. You're looking to accomplish some objectives that could be measured. Right? So what it does is it eliminates really the fantasy aspect of it, the pontification aspect of it. And so then whoever is the leader is actually not an exception to the rule like a Barack Obama or whatever, but they're actually a representative of the whole, which means that when you see someone who represents a community organization, they are actually a part of that community and are not someone who is an exception to that community.
How do we do tactical assessments under colonized conditions?
Well, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. But you have to objectify what you want. And so a lot of times that's why a part of the book is, what do you want? A lot of people, they're mad, right? But they don't know what they want. They don't know when they won. They don't know, when they've reached their objectives. They just want a local government to do something, right? So being able to identify what you want and why is critical. So let's say a community will say, well, we need business, we need business, we need business. Well, and this is what a lot of people in city government know, that business is not coming unless certain other factors are there. So other people know that too. Right? So in the black community, when people say we need, our mind is you clear our land and stick a business there and it works. No, there are certain factors that have to come into play. And here's the part. The people in the city, especially if you've got degrees in urban planning, you know how to bring about what the people want. You just won't do it. So knowing where to start, knowing what to objectify, knowing what factors to go after is critical. What you want is property value to go up. That's what you want. So how does property value go up? What are those factors that play into that? And then you go into the Realtors Association, the Homeowners Association. You go into all of these associations that have a concerted effort to keep, and this is in the book Code of Law, to keep one part of the city with high-priced housing and one part of the city with low price. You see. So you have covenants, you have certain community agreements, you have these types of things, and then you have City Hall, which can selectively enforce different ordinances, different statutes, different things, and that's how you create a ghetto. It's very easy. But to answer your question, how do you objectify things under colonialism? A part of the book is property, right? We talk about what we're actually protecting. What we're protecting is property. And so our thoughts are property, our actions are property, our physical property is property. And so understanding that there are rules to that, and a community organization organizes to protect those rules of property that will keep you protected in this society. So property equals protection.
Okay, now we talk about targeting things, and everything's around organizing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem I don't see necessarily is just organization. It has to be sustained, because we saw over the summer, last summer, police violence, there was worldwide outrage, there was organization around the movements.
Yeah.
Is organization alone enough? because your book frames out, you know, how important an organization is, but how sustainable is that organization? Or how important is it to have that organization be able to sustain a lengthy
Right.
campaign?
And to follow off of what Antoine said about how to do that under colonialism, see, we have been taught to be so reactionary, right? To where we can only respond to what other people do. And a lot of times it's too late. You see, so along with developing a worldview, embracing a cultural identity, studying your cultural and political history becomes a proactive push to where you have interests, right? So an interest is not only something you protect, but it's something you pursue at the same time. Learn that with the labor unions. You know, so you're protecting and pursuing at the same time. It's like, you know, some sports like boxing, you know, you have a offense and a defense that's actually the same motions.
Right.
You know, well, it's the same with political organizing, right? Once you identify a set of objectives, you push to make those objectives come to pass. And you'll have to protect your property, and then you'll have to pursue, you know, your interests, right? So it's actually a duality, right? So what happened with the police brutality situations, see, that's not a community organization issue, right? That's an issue of public corruption. Now, when you have public corruption, then your government is crooked. You see?
Well, that affects the community, so isn't it the community's job to replace that government?
Absolutely.
In the type of society.
Absolutely.
Allegedly.
And that's where the vote comes in.
Okay.
See, because when you look at how this country was set up, and Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers gave a great example of what's called usurpation in tyranny, right? And so basically he said that the federal government, the way they set it up was powerless to stop tyranny at the local level. He said the only way to stop tyranny and usurpation at the local level is a change of men, which means that you got to get those people out of office. That's why Hands Up Don't Shoot in Ferguson, their objective was to get rid of the people who were making the decisions that would bring about the death of a Michael Brown. See, the local people understood that, but when people from other places came in, they redirected that attention away from the local government and began, all of these fires started popping up all over the place, and people became purely reactionary to what was happening, and you never could have a sustained push to elect people who would make that less likely to happen, right? So when you're energized in one area and not organized in another, then what happens is frustration sets in. You put all this energy time in to holler, scream, to protest, to do all those types of things, but you never did organize to actually put the people in office that can make the change. Which means that the people who are going to make the change are people that you have to vet from your own community and not from the outside, right? So our emphasis, how we focus on things is very important, and understanding you organize to either pursue or protect your interests, but public corruption is dealt with by voting out the dirty mayors, the dirty police chiefs, the dirty city council people, and all of the thieves that come, with corruption. And when you call it public corruption, see, I don't like to use the term police brutality, because what happens is, what it's saying is that the culpability stops at the street, and it doesn't.
I agree with that.
It does not stop at the street, and it does not.
Government sanction.
Yeah, it
Absolutely
does
right.
not end with the prosecution of a police officer.
Right.
It ends with a mayor being fired because of that. See, because the first rule of political organizing is self-preservation, which means that if you're a politician, everything you're going to do is to preserve your position of power, right? Well, if the word gets out that if you brutalize a black person or shoot him in the back when it's unnecessary, or these types of killings take place, you can lose your office, your position. They'll stop overnight. You wouldn't have to make threats to them. You wouldn't have to threaten to defund them. You see what I mean? You wouldn't have to do any of that, because the political science of it would mandate a more humane and a more investigatory police officer, and not these henchmen and the Third Reich, that you have now, because you won't stay elected. So people will will fight like I don't know what to fan over all of these hotbed issues so they can get reelected. Well, they have to lose their jobs. The people have to vote them out, and then the message will be sent that if you can't control your police chief, you're going to lose your job. But then there has to be candidates who actually come in to do what the people want done. So you have offense and defense. You see, you're getting rid of the people who are hurting you, but then you're putting people in that are going to do what you want. See, it's both. And very seldom do we, because you can bet the other side, when they see one candidate is failing or look like they're going to raise up some more to take their place.
Right.
So, and the people can never get a candidate in because the local political parties end up telling you who you should vote for. So you can start local political parties, and they don't have to have ballot access because you're not going to run somebody from your party, but you can vet the candidates that are out there, give them a scorecard, and tell the people, tell the community, hey, this person's not going to operate in our best interest. And let them do the responding to you.
But isn't that part of the problem that our communities don't have enough?
Exactly. Well,
because you said, one thing you say is to fight for the thing, first you have to identify what's valuable.
right.
Right. Now, most of us, or I'll say part of the problem in our community is we don't value ourselves for whatever, for a plethora of reasons, or we don't believe that we're in trouble. So, how do I buy into organizing with anyone to change things that I think are fine?
Yeah, well, that's just the thing. A lot of people don't know how to organize. And that's one of the things, that's one of the problems, you know. You can be a part of an organization,
Right.
you know, but that doesn't mean that the organization is organized. You know, and here again, most of the organizations are nothing more than extensions of the personalities of the people who lead them. So when you look at, the agenda of the nation's fraternities and sororities, when you look at the agenda of the different religious national groups, you see a uniformity, you know.
Very.
And none of it impacts.
Very.
None of it, because they're all the same people.
Right.
You know, they're all the same groups. The leaders of this group are the leaders in that group. So they just change hats and change colors if you want or whatever. Change oaths, but nothing substantive changed for the people who are not in those organizations.
Right.
That's why whenever a kid, wants a letter recommendation to join an organization or whatever, I make it mandatory that kid write me a one-page paper on how their membership in that organization will affect the lives of people who will never be considered worthy to even enter into the organization. Because if you're not organized around the least of these, as Christ says, then you're an enemy of his. So as far as true political organizing is concerned, true political organizing eliminates that hierarchy. It eliminates elitism. And what it does is it brings everybody into a consensus over the basic fundamental things that are critical for everybody, not dependent on what your social status is, whether you graduated from college or not, or whether you are part of this group or that group.
Okay. Because again, how do I know what I don't know?
Yeah, exactly.
And then how do you reach me?
But see, that's where political organizing comes in, because political organizing identifies what the interests are of the community. See, that's where you get your education, right? So a lot of black people are confused and organized because they're not politically educated. But where are they going to get it from? Do you see in any of the national Negro organizations a mandate for political organization? They'll say voting, right?
Exactly.
They'll say that. They say we got to get out and vote. But you don't see candidates vetted. You don't see education on what the real issues are.
They get vetted, they bring a check.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
That's all they need, the highest bidder.
Yeah.
This is your book.
No.
I want to get on my soapbox.
No, I understand. So that's the thing. So when people organize at the local level, it forces all of those other groups to conform. It forces them to soul search, and you do have to be very or else-ish with your own people. because you have a hierarchy of black cities. I mean, the whole thing about developing, because we talk about critical race theory in the book, right? The major thing about critical race theory, the people who need to be the most concerned about critical race theory being taught are illegitimate black leaders. That group should be terrified of this being taught, because what it does is it provides a model for us evaluating whether they've been successful or not.
Okay.
For us. Because if we have an interest and they don't do what we say do, they should have been fired. You see?
20 years ago.
Exactly. Well, 50, 30 years ago. Most of them. Because they'll get off a good speech and they'll throw up the fact that they, got their butt kicked on a bridge. Well, we got other stuff going on now, and that doesn't qualify. It qualifies you to lead then, but it doesn't qualify you to lead now.
That's right.
So you can pass resolutions, you can do all those type of things, make guest appearances, and this, that, and the other, and the hood is plummeted into the ninth level of hell because the proactive things, you know what I'm saying, are not done. So what you do is you give those people all the accolades and push them out the way and keep going, because the group has a plan, and the group has to continue to exist. So that's the Orioles factor. It begins actually with I don't want to say bogus Negro leadership, but ineffective, inadequate Negro leadership.
Bogus Negro, I'll say it. Bogus Negro leadership. I'll say it.
Fine.
That kind of segues into my next question about tact.
Okay.
It's an acronym.
Right.
You want to explain to us a little bit?
Sure. I was doing a presentation for a local politician who's organized the community, and they had a major success, right? They went down to City Hall and got what they wanted, and I told them to celebrate that, flaunt it, taunt it, and say the best is yet to come. We're going to knock this whole city down. And so part of their momentum was to invite me in just to give them a pep talk, right? So I came up with an acronym, and it's really the 4 elements of community organizing. And based on my experience as a union organizer and a church planter and all those, just being in the community, there's 4 things that a successful community organizer has to have with the public. Number 1 is trust. Number 2 is acceptance. Number 3 is consistency. And number 4 is knowledge. And I'll use the 4th one, is that in order to be a community organizer, you have to be the source of knowledge, which means that people will come to you for answers to questions before they'll go to their elected officials or before they'll go to anyone else. So you have to be the most knowledgeable in the environment. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable in the group, because different people have different skill sets that they bring to the table. But as being the organizer, then you're going to be the one who is considered knowledgeable to the public, which means the public will come to you and ask you about laws, about policies and procedures, about whatever, and your organization ends up becoming the go-to people for information on this, and this.
Okay. All right.
So it takes time.
Okay. Now, the Montgomery Improvement Association.
Oh, yeah.
Featured very highly in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Now, do we use them as an example, like with their input into the civil rights movement?
Sure. I mean, Women's Political Council, Women's Political Council, Montgomery Improvement Association, Montgomery Chapter, NAACP. See, all those organizations are critical, because what we're learning what to do and what not to do. Because a lot of people, a lot of our organizations were making stuff up as they went along. So what we do is we get a chance to critically look at it, right? What did they get right? What did they get wrong? Where did they make mistakes? Where did they get right on? Or were there some determining factors that really had nothing to do with what we were doing locally that determined the outcome? You see what I'm saying? So it's a critical look at the Montgomery Improvement Association and other organizations to see their effectiveness locally. So we're not really talking about what happened when and this person did this and that, no. But what we're doing is we're giving a general assessment of these organizations, how they formed, what was their strategy, what were they trying to accomplish. And interestingly enough, we got a copy of the demands of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and integration wasn't one of them. They did not want the buses integrated. They wanted to be treated better.
Right.
Now that's important.
Right. Right.
You see, that's important, so because you have to ask yourself the question, where did this whole notion of integration come from? And Fred Gray, who I used to be his law clerk, in Tuskegee, when he wrote the book The Bus Ride to Justice, he identified what integration was and what it wasn't. Integration was not black people living next to white people. It was not black kids going to school with white kids. It was doing whatever it took to lessen the chances of black houses being blown up, black men being lynched. So it was purely reactionary. It was, and the thesis was, or the idea was that it's going to be difficult for white people to blow up a school trying to kill black students if white students are in it too. You see? So, interestingly, my daughter brought up the point that a lot of the people who were movers and shakers in the bus boycott lived in segregated communities and remained in segregated communities even after the opportunity to move out changed, right? So people will say, well, a lot of black people moved out of the hood, if you would, after integration, and that's not true. That's not true at all. Because what the assumption is that if you got a car, that makes you more moral than the people who don't. You see? Because people will say, they'll say, well, all the lawyers moved out. No, they didn't. They actually stayed. It was somebody else who moved out. You see, a lot of the movers and shakers never left the hood. But what you did have was, as Martin Luther King said in his Where Do We Go From Here, you had mobilization being the next phase of segregation. Meaning black people were just not able to move from one spot to another where the jobs were. Right. And because the jobs moved, the property in the black community plummeted. Right. And people had to travel more than 5 miles to get to where it was. And when the bus system stopped, rather than integrated, they stopped it. But it was going to stop anyway because of the car industry. That's in the book Highway 80. Right. The car industry was coming in and they were lobbying Montgomery, Mobile, and Jefferson County, Birmingham, to end their bus system because they wanted people to drive. You see? So you already had a politic to end the bus system even before Rosa Parks made a move. Right. It was already scheduled to end. A lot of people don't know that. But it was already slated because they were already phasing out routes, phasing out bus drivers, phasing out. So as the boycott was advancing, in the ideas of the Public Service Commission and in the governor's office and in the county, in the city office, that's a dinosaur anyway. We want people to drive cars. That's why our first book is called Highway 80, a drive through Alabama Civil Rights Corridor, because you're actually doing it in the car. Right. You see? So we're going to emphasize that maybe in the last edition, of that book. So having a critical understanding of those things that happen is important for us in organizing today. That's why we look at those groups.
Now you wrote this book obviously because you feel that we're not organized as a people.
Right.
Okay.
So we're not strategically organized around objectives.
Okay. So what's the problem?
Well, the problem is leadership that's benefiting from the status quo. Mm-hmm. Most of the people who we accept as being our leaders have no solutions. And they have no solutions because their rising to power was not dependent on them having it. Mm. When you don't have it, and that's how people want it, when you don't have political organizations around the interests of people, then that's when these prolific personalities emerge, and their end game is to stay elected. And the very power structure that we're seeking to dismantle depends on them. Mm. It depends on their lack of organization. It depends on their theft. It depends on their shiftiness. So that's why critical race theory is important, because it makes no distinction between white leaders and black leaders when it comes to the effectiveness of dealing with the hood. Everybody's favored. Right. The black ones and the white ones. But what we seldom discuss is the relationship between the black ones and the white ones, because both need each other. You see?
So what do we need to do to fix it?
Sure. Organize locally.
Okay.
And that's why we start or else out with the black family. We have to dispel the notions, and let me tell you why. We have to dispel the notions that everything's going wrong with us now because of slavery. The reason why is because mentally it tells us that we're not going to be able to change until white folk change. See, that's what it tells us. We can't move forward until white people change. because they're the ones that started slavery. They're the ones, and until they change, we're not going to be able to move forward, which is the biggest fallacy that there is. When you go back and you look at when things started to take a nosedive, things started to actually take a nosedive in the 50s and the 60s. That's when the black family broke up. That's when, and so when you start looking on television shows like Good Times, the biggest issue in Good Times for James Evans Jr. was going on welfare. You remember?
Yeah,
He did
yeah.
not want to go on welfare because he knew if he went on welfare, his family was over. In one of the episodes, he went and got a pool cue and said, I'll shoot pool to support my family. But I ain't going, well, what was he afraid of? You know.
Because the system told it could be a man.
George Jefferson, same thing. What was he afraid of? Fred Sanford lived in the hood, but what he want on welfare? He didn't take a check. You see, Grady did, but he did. but what's at stake with that, right? What's at stake is when you have a government that wants to use the black condition as an engine to fuel policies and things that have nothing to do with the black family. So you have to begin with dispelling those myths. And so what we do is we provide an idea of how the slaves organized. Because you had slave revolts coming out of slavery, you had families coming out of slavery, and as quoted in several of our sources, the first act of liberation for a lot of the slaves was to marry the women that they had been with most of the time over 25 years. So when you look at the research, you had a majority of the slaves in plantation systems living in a family relationship with a mama and a dad. You see, which totally dispels the myths that a lot of people have put out that the slaves had no family. And that's not true. It shows how resilient we were during slavery, but it also hides the fact that we have to ask some questions about what happened in the 50s and 60s when the civil rights movement was going on. So you see the two factors? You have a story of resilience on one hand, but if you think everything is because of slavery, it also causes you not to ask the question about whether the policies of the 50s and 60s under Lyndon B. Johnson worked.
Well, and that's well and good, and I hear you. But how do you reach people that are not going to go to ASU and read this book?
Yeah.
How do you reach people that are being mistaught by this system that slavery was this when we know that it's that?
Right. Well, what makes us unique is the fact that, and everybody that knows us knows there's no place we won't go to talk to people about what we're talking about. That's the difference. We're not authors, we're not intellectuals. Our end game is not ideas. You know, because we're already in the community and we have a strong community presence, then this book is actually an extension of what we're already doing. You know, most people who write on these topics have no credibility with the people at all. They're authors. They sit up in offices all day. They teach kids that, you know, that nobody knows who they are. You know, I very rarely heard someone say, oh, I took so-and-so's class at Harvard or Yale or Princeton or whatever, and I'm one of their students. You never hear that. You know, very seldom do you hear somebody say, oh yeah, I took this class. But with us, as you know, there's no church we won't go to, there's no street corner we won't stand on, there's no place we won't deal with, and there's nobody we won't talk to. So this book is actually something we're going to leave with them after we've already had a physical presence.
Okay.
Now, earlier you discussed quantifying our interests and quantifying what we're organizing for and converting that to material terms, whether that be property or anything else. Does the Orwell's factor have the same relationship to white property?
To white property?
Yes.
Well, property is property, and what happens is that what we're talking about is we're talking about the ability to materialize our ideas into things, you know, that are quantitative and qualitative. Good example is the majority of our kids that want to go to college can't break the ceiling of 18 on the ACT. You know, we want 25, 26. You know, so what do we have to do to get that? You know, well, you may have to fire the principal. You may have to fire the guidance counselor. You see, you may have to do some internal changes to the curriculum. You know, but the outcome is critical. We want these changes made. We want our kids scoring within this percentile, and we're not going to stop until we get it. Now, what does that do? Well, statistics show that kids that read 2 or 3 grade levels ahead don't chase each other with high-powered rifles around the community. They tend not to get pregnant before 18. You see what I'm saying? So it places our young people in a totally different social strata just by hitting on the mark of saying we want our kids to score 25 and not 18. Now, what we'll do in sports, if we say I want my kid to run a 4.4 instead of a 4.6, what do? Train them. Get out there. What's the difference?
Yeah.
You see, we want our team to go from 4 and 6 to 7 and 3. What do? And sometimes the coach got to go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we'll fire a coach in a minute, but when it's time to fire a principal or a superintendent, you see what I'm saying? For some reason we can't do that, and that is purely because of a misdirection of our priorities.
Then it sounds like to me we need more of a change in our curriculum because, again, we're being taught by our oppressors. Our kids are being taught by our oppressors. And they're being taught other values, and they're being tested on those values that they don't live. Because you learn things in school, then you go home to the hood, as it were, and it doesn't translate, because it doesn't help.
Right.
Then you're tested on those same things, so how's the test even fair if you're not teaching those things?
Right.
But they're unrelated.
But see, here's the thing. You won't learn that in a school. You learn that in a political organization.
Okay.
So you won't learn what people are doing to you in the school because they're not going to teach that. We want the school to teach what political organizations will teach you. You see? So, sure, other people are not going to teach you how to defeat them.
Right.
But,
Exactly.
but a political organization will.
Right.
You see, a political organization will teach you that other people do not have your best interest at heart, and they'll dumb you down. They'll give you a degree, but they know you do not know enough to beat them because they never taught you that. Well, the political organization will teach you that. You see, because what a lot of our young people are afraid of is that they don't know the nature of the game they're in. They don't know the nature of it. And it's not the school system's job to do that. It's the political organization's job to teach you what kind of game you're in. So you can be properly prepared for it. So that's what our young people don't have. They have a total mischaracterization of the nature of the fight that they're in, right? So because they keep bringing knives to a gunfight, you see, exactly, every time. And then they fall into this position of begging, right, which everybody's comfortable with,
Right.
you see. So political organization is so critical because it outlines for you where your interests lay, and it also is very clear on how to protect it, right, and how to advance it at the same time. So that's why it's now time for us to politically organize. And so in the past we've had institutions like the church. The church is an excellent community organizer, but a terrible political organizer. Terrible. You may have certain individuals who can do that, but I guarantee you they got trained somewhere else, or they are a social anomaly.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Which means that they do have a divine gift of organization, but that doesn't extend beyond them.
Right.
So those type of people can never leave because once they die, it's over. They can consult. You see, they can be a support. They can be a part of a brain trust. But they don't need to be out front because if something happens to them, everybody is so focused on them that when they die, the movement dies.
See that?
That's what it is.
So again, before I let you go,
Yeah.
are there any organizations that you think are hitting the mark or coming up to the mark right now that you want to suggest or
Well, without being specific, I will say that the prison reform movement in Alabama, I think, is probably the best hope that we have right now.
Okay.
But at the same time, it has to take on a formation of a more unified front and a more objectified list of demands, right? Which means that not only do you want to stop private prisons, which the unconsolidated efforts of people in the prison reform movement have been excellent at doing. You have one organization in particular whose founding members really changed the game of voting in the state of Alabama, And it came about with a court case, Glasgow versus Allen, which was dismissed. So you get a court case that was dismissed, but you have a consent decree with it, which is very unusual. And then you have all of these rolling policy changes and then legal changes that come about as a result of that activity. And that is phenomenal. That is top-notch stuff. You're not going to find that in a lot of places the way you have organization, advocacy, and legislative change all wrapped up into one thing as far as black people are concerned. And so that organization and other organizations that have done that, you've got student groups starting unofficial organizations, right, that are actually convincing banks not to fund the private prison system. And those banks have followed suit, you see, and those kids are not even trying to be recognized.
That's all here to think about.
Right.
Which is in itself amazing of all places.
Right.
Because we know how it is.
Right. So you've got community organizations made up of parents who had incarcerated loved ones, very effective. You've got students, very effective. You've got faculty coming together, doing research that these organizations can use as information to help with their strategizing, right? So what's been disconnected is the classroom from the street.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so when the classroom and the street, once the street trusts the classroom enough, you know, for us to sit down and have a talk, you know, the classroom can actually give the street information that the street can use to change things. Because that's what that's why we TAC, the last letter in the acronym is K for knowledge. You know, because once you get the knowledge on what this is about and how to operate in it, then you're going to be fine. But it's the mischaracterization of what's going on out there that's the problem.
Okay. Listen, again, it's always a pleasure. I know you pressed the time. I appreciate you so much, Dr. White. This is just another installment. We always have you back. We'll have you back again.
Sure.
And you heard, we go to street corners and everything else with this information. We're going to hold them to it.
Absolutely.
Hold them to it. So if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, please contact us at realtalkwithherschel@gmail.com. If you have a group that would like to maybe get in touch with Dr. White, you have an email or anything you want to...
Sure. rwhite@alasu.edu. That's rwhite@alasu.edu.
And again, if you can't reach him, reach me. I get him. We make sure we get him out to you.
Absolutely.
You know, always a pleasure, Dr. White.
All right, brother.
Appreciate you.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Again, this is Real Talk with Herschel, live with Dr. White, talking about his book, Or Else. Get it. It'll be available soon, right?
Absolutely.